Chapter 15, 2012 to 2013. We parked our car in the hotel lot on a gray November morning and walked through the sleet and light snow falling from the dark morning sky. Signs directed us to a brightly lit room of people. We were a little early and everyone was talking together in small groups of 4 or 5. I noticed a table serving tea and I left Andy to stand alone for a few minutes so I could get some. When I returned, Andy was talking with someone. The man looked healthy. I had my deep brain stimulation surgery a couple of months ago, he told us. I felt so great that I had to drive down here from Wyoming to share my experience. I looked at him carefully. Could he really have had symptoms like Andy did now, only 2 months ago? I could not have picked him out as a man with Parkinson's. He moved his hair and pointed out 2 little bumps just above his forehead. These are where the electrodes are placed. I have permanent small horns, he laughed, quickly adding, and permanent symptom relief. As I waited for the program to begin, I found myself looking for those telltale forehead bumps in the crowd. Almost everyone appeared to be healthy. We sat toward the back of the auditorium, and the program began with exercise. In fact, we participated in 2 or 3 exercise programs throughout that day, led by different people. We exercised in our chairs, standing up, and sometimes with someone else. One of the convention's themes was exercising with Parkinson's. What stood out to me was how happy and enthusiastic the crowd was. Parkinson's is a disease that robs people of their physical ability and often makes it challenging to simply get up and down or walk without help. Andy had never been attracted to exercise classes before or after Parkinson's. He preferred working out with weights at a gym, doing yoga, running in a forest, skiing on a mountain, or surfing in the ocean. All his preferred ways to exercise were more solitary pursuits, and all were difficult to do with Parkinson's. I could see that he was not fully convinced that standing by his chair and waving his arms around in a group setting was going to do him any good. Most of the people in the room looked as if they were doing much better than Andy was, though, and I thought we'd better keep open minds. We learned that all the people in the room could laugh at themselves as we watched a comedy routine about living with Parkinson's. We listened intently together as a speech expert spoke about changes in the vocal abilities of Parkinson's patients. This was a tribe of people we belonged with. The afternoon was devoted to small breakout sessions. We were looking forward to a panel discussion about DBS surgery. This time we took seats closer to the front of the stage, where 5 people sat at a table. The panel included a bioethicist, a physician's assistant whose job was troubleshooting issues with DBS surgery, and a neurosurgeon from Denver who was an expert in DBS rehab and had performed many DBS surgeries. Also on the panel were Donna Miller, a woman who had received the DBS surgery for Parkinson's 8 years previously, and Davis Finney himself, who had received the DBS surgery 4 years before. The 5 of them spoke eloquently about how the surgery was done and led us step by step through the couple of different ways it could be implemented, depending on the specifics of the patient. We were told that the possible complications included death from brain hemorrhage, had lessened dramatically in the last 5 years. This surgery was not for everyone, but Parkinson's patients who had received it noticed extreme relief from tremor, rigidity, bradykinesia, and a phenomenon known as the masked face. The panelists explained that the surgery did not help with balance issues. A candidate had to have idiopathic Parkinson's and no signs of dementia or cognitive loss. Donna and Davis shared their personal stories and then opened up for questions from the audience. What are the side effects from the surgery and how long do the positive effects last? And could you please explain what you mean by there being a window of time for being a candidate? I asked. We were told there weren't really any negative side effects from the surgery and that movement disorder symptom relief lasted forever, but it would not stop other progressive symptoms. The panel explained that not everyone was a candidate, and even if someone was a candidate now, they might not always be. Parkinson's, after all, was a progressive neurological disorder, and for most patients, there was a window of time when they were eligible that might close as their symptoms progressed. Increased age and cognitive dysfunction were some of the factors taken into consideration to qualify as a candidate. Andy was visibly tremoring in his body and head and sitting on his hands to stop them from flapping at his sides. Davis Finney looked directly at Andy. 4 years ago, I was exactly like you, he said. We left the conference and drove home with renewed hope in this possibility for DBS brain surgery. After seeing so many people who had received the surgery that had successfully reduced and eliminated many of their most debilitating symptoms, Andy's fears were mostly relieved. We drove home to our daughter and our house building project with an entirely new focus on possible treatment. Before I left for our annual art show in Austin, I phoned the VA and made an appointment in early 2013 with Dr. Sarah and Joanne to discuss the possibility of Andy being a candidate for DBS. Taos, Los Angeles, and Catalina Island, 2013. Andy became a candidate for DBS surgery in the early months of 2013. He met with Dr. Sarah again, who told him that the last hurdle was to be cognitively evaluated before acceptance. He endured the 4-hour examination, taking countless mental tests before he was pronounced dementia-free. We were informed that we would need to travel to the West Los Angeles VA hospital for the surgery. At first, this scared me because of, being far away from home when there was a risk of possible complications or even death felt overwhelming. Regardless, we scheduled the surgery for June. In March, our house was finally ready for us to move into. There was a bedroom and bathroom not yet finished because we were waiting for a VA grant to come through that would allow us to complete it as a wheelchair-accessible area in case Andy ever needed that. It was wonderful having a house to live in, and we reveled in the luxury of it. Alana moved out of the little camper she had been staying in and into her wonderful room. Andy and I loved the giant windows that gave us views of the sky all the time and the stars at night as we laid in bed. The ease of having our bathroom only steps away was wonderful. I would like to have a dog, I told Andy. Well, I want a Siamese cat, he answered. In our 40 years of marriage, I had never heard him say this or known he wanted a cat. Since when? I asked. Since always, he said. When I was a little boy, I wished to have a Siamese cat. Well, I said, you are 68 years old, and perhaps it's time to grant that wish. We rescued a puppy and a Siamese kitten, and our house went from sheltering 3 to sheltering 5. By that point, we were anxious to receive a certificate of occupancy to get a mortgage, since the land grant issue had finally been resolved in our favor. I think this whole juggling process was most stressful for me, since I was in charge of keeping it all straight. Andy and I went through what all home builders go through, limiting our funds. I guess we can keep the wood dining table we bought years ago at Walmart, I said. We made do many times and put off a lot of purchases, knowing that if our mortgage was too high, we would lose our freedom. We eventually received our certificate of occupancy and got a mortgage loan that was enough to pay all those credit cards back and cover the work that was continuing every day. Andy and I both felt relieved and were able to fully focus on his upcoming surgery. We got a call informing us that Andy's surgery would not happen in June, but had been rescheduled for August 11th. Alana was going to come with us. Sky lived in LA and would be there too, and Brendan would arrive the day Andy was released from the hospital. Andy's brother Roger and his second wife Judy were flying in from Seattle the day after surgery. I was grateful for all that support. I had planned a 3-day trip to an oceanfront condo on Catalina Island after he was released from the hospital as a restful, celebratory family gathering before we all returned home. The VA flew us to Los Angeles the day before the surgery. We stayed in a beautiful new house built by the Fisher family as a home away from home for out-of-town veterans and their families to stay while they received surgery or care at the hospital. We were excited and a little scared. My mom called. We are praying for you, Andy. Thank you, but please pray for the doctors instead, Andy replied. It was nerve-wracking to put him completely in the hands of the doctors, but it was worse to consider Andy's life without this possibility for improvement. We were led to a hospital room, and Andy went through the initial surgical prep. Then the magic began. The TV was tuned to a channel that played relaxing instrumental music and showed scenes of natural wonders. 2 women came in. "We are here to offer massage therapy to you," one of them said. "Are you interested? We can massage your hands, your feet, shoulders, and head, or the works." "What are the charges for your services?" I asked. "No charge," she answered. "The hospital pays us to be here, and you can call on us anytime during daytime hours." Andy received the works and was relaxed when the time came for his surgery. We followed the gurney as Andy was wheeled to another area of the hospital to have his last ever MRI. MRIs are not advised for people with metal in their brain. When Andy was wheeled out, we had only a moment. I kissed his lips gently through the big metal head fixator the doctor had screwed into his skull and looked into his eyes and saw love. Then he was off. Our wait began. Alana and I walked through the seductive warmth of LA back to Fisher House. We were moved to an upstairs bedroom big enough for Roger and Judy to stay with us when they arrived the next day. We did yoga and ate breakfast and took a walk. We napped and sat in the garden. We prayed and read our books. Sky came and we all walked to the hospital together. The nurse coordinator told us all was going well and showed us where to wait. Several hours later, I was getting anxious. I went into the ICU, which was next to our waiting area, and Andy's supposed destination after surgery. The hospital was closing up for the night, staff were going home, and the night staff was arriving. The ICU nurse called the surgical ward for me, but nobody answered. She told me the surgery was probably still in progress. I returned to our waiting area. "Aren't those 2 of Andy's doctors standing at the elevator?" Alana asked suddenly. We looked, and sure enough, there were Dr. Hauptmann and Dr. Langevin. We ran over to them, and they smiled at us. "Everything is going very well. Andy had to take a pee, so we are having a small break while they walk into the bathroom." "Thank you," I replied. What a strange thing that someone in the middle of receiving brain surgery would get up to go to the bathroom. Now we waited with better peace of mind as a couple more hours went by. Every time a gurney was pushed past our waiting area toward the ICU, I jumped up to see if it was Andy. Finally, it was Andy, and we followed him into the ICU. Dr. Langevin took me aside. "Everything went perfectly and is working well, but the system cannot be turned on until his inflammation goes down, so he will be shaking for a little while longer." When I finally got to talk to Andy alone, he was shaking like mad. "It didn't work," he said. "Look at me. I'm shaking worse than ever." His eyes looked desperate. I held him gently, leaning over the bed. "Andy, it did work. The doctor told me that they can't turn on the stimulator yet. It did work. You are going to be better. Now you need to rest." We spent the next 2 hours with him and realized none of us were going to sleep anytime soon. He was too hot, shaking hard, uncomfortable, and had head pain. We took his covers off and massaged his shaking arms and legs continuously. After being given pain medicine by a nurse, he mercifully fell into a deep sleep. The rest of us went back to Fisher House to recover from a very emotional day. Roger and Judy arrived the following day and were indispensable that week. Their presence allowed us to almost always have someone with Andy, monitoring his needs and keeping him company. After 4 nights in the hospital, Andy was scheduled for programming. The stimulator in his chest would be used to adjust the 8 points of contact the 2 electrodes had in his brain. Roger, Judy, Alana, Sky, and I watched as a doctor and 2 technicians from the Medtronic company, which was the manufacturer of the stimulator, worked to find what was possible for symptom control for Andy. Andy described feeling rushes of energy while the doctor with the controller activated the electrodes in his brain. First, his one side stopped, then the other. Finally, both sides completely stilled, and Andy smiled with enormous joy. The surgery was successful. "We have to turn you off now for several weeks so your brain can completely heal and all the swelling and inflammation can go away," the doctor explained. "Then Dr. Sarah will turn the stimulator on and permanently adjust you to this level of stillness." Andy knew he could get through another month with his tremors, since total relief was in sight. When he was allowed to leave the hospital, he directed me to a spiritual place his parents had taken him when he was a teenager, called Lake Shrine, where a man from India named Paramahansa Yogananda had started a center for meditation. We walked through gardens that surrounded a small lake, and then sat on a bench together, absorbing the healing energy of the place and feeling grateful for Andy's successful surgery. After we spent a couple days in a hotel room in Los Angeles to make certain Andy was well enough to travel, Brendan flew down from San Francisco, and we all boarded a ferry to Catalina Island. We stayed in an oceanfront condo that had a large balcony overlooking the sea. We were there for 3 heavenly days. Andy stayed in the condo for the first 2 days and enjoyed watching us kayak and swim from the balcony. On the 3rd day, he walked to the beach and lay in the sun, and that evening we all took the golf cart that came with the condo into the town of Avalon and had dinner at a fish restaurant. We journeyed home with renewed hope for our new life.